Hello, I'm back. Anybody else seen the DMX clip? The 10-minute clip where DMX sort of breaks down in a very, very masculine, holding back the tears. You know, when you're just so hip hop or so man, where you just can't, like, the tears can't fall. Can't let a person see you cry. That mentality. I've seen that a lot throughout my life, you know, where men don't cry. Men don't cry. I was watching Hotep Jesus the other day, and he cried, but you didn't see any tears. Before the tear got a chance to get out from the eye, he wiped it away so fast. It's like a man in tears. We're taught from very, very early on, you know, not to act like a girl, and that only it's okay for girls to cry. And I think that's pretty effed up, that we actually tell men that they shouldn't cry, or young boys that they shouldn't cry. You know, I think that sucks. DMX is 2 years older than me. All right, so he's 2 years older than me, and when he was 14, that was 1986, when he was 14 years old. And if you're 14 years old, okay, wait a minute, let me see what this is. Why would DMX smoke crack when he knows DMX is also an FBI agent? Kinda. I gotta brighten up my screen to see this. Give me a sec. There we go. Alright. Why would DMX smoke crack when he knows DMX is also an FBI agent? Kinda. He told a story on the Breakfast Club about pulling someone over who put him off. Pulling someone over who cut him off, and telling them he was FBI. I remember that. He had like a badge and everything. Yeah. Well, you know, we got a grown man who's almost 50 years old, who's obviously in therapy. And in this therapy, I believe he's in touch, because as soon as the guy who what's that, Talib Kweli? As soon as the person who was interviewing him mentioned that guy's name, it was like a trigger, and he was in so much of that pain about, why would you do that to a kid? Why would you give a kid crack? You see, the story goes that they were in the studio, and he had just finished doing a bunch of time in the juvenile prison system, or juvenile jail system in Yonkers. He probably was maybe, I don't know if Yonkers kids went to Spofford, but you know, he was in that version of being incarcerated, you know, as a teenager. So he comes out, and he was good at beatboxing. He knew someone who was a rapper. They would be in their studio, and at the studio, things like, you know, child abuse and drugs and sex and, you know, a whole bunch of conversations that shouldn't be having with children are being had. And one of these things that happened in this hip hop reality that DMX came out of was that he was passed what he believed was marijuana, but it wasn't marijuana. It was crack cocaine in the marijuana. He was 14 years old, and that release, that's where he attributes the releasing of this devil, this demon that was inside of him. And I thought about, I listened to it twice, and I really was like, wow, like pretty moved by him being able to speak on this. But I kept thinking, and I was thinking about the timeline, and this was 1986, and arguably it could have even been 1985. Oh, relax, sir, relax. It could have been 1985, arguably, if he's in fact the age that they say he is, which is 49 years old. So it's possible it could be from 1984, 1985, or 1986. And in those years, it really wasn't crack. It was freebase in those beginning stages. There was a lot of freebase going on. And people used to smoke the freebase inside of the marijuana blunts, and they would call them woolers. And there would be people running around, people that you would hang with, and you would talk with them, and they would be like, ain't nothing cooler than a wooler. And they would be walking around, snapping. The girls would have it like hanging from their mouth. Ain't nothing cooler than a wooler. I was 12 years old at that time. I wasn't around any of that stuff. It didn't happen for me until I was 14 years old as well. And at 14 years old is when you got introduced to it. But he got introduced to it 2 years before I had gotten introduced to it. Or at least just knowing what it was. And I think it was pretty low down for this guy to give a 14-year-old kid anything that has to do with drugs, like that's disgusting, of course. But I'm more concentrating on the pain. I'm more concentrating on the pain that DMX still exhibits, no pun intended, from that whole, like, it reminds me of the every 7 year thing. You see, the way the human mind is, or the human brain is, it has these intervals, and one of them is the 7. And the 7th, when you're 7 years old, you go through very important times in your life. And when you're 14 years old, you go through different, like, you can remember 14 more so than you can remember 13 and 15. And then you usually go through relationships in a 7-year kind of thing, intimate relationships and platonic relationships. They usually do like this 7-year kind of an itch, and you find yourself changing and doing different things. And I was thinking about how much pain DMX appeared to have, where he was holding back those tears so much so, and trying to still understand that the person that he was around was a snake, and he thought this person loved him. He said something very interesting in this thing. He said, what did he say? Let me let you guys get a little view of the streets. That'll be better. DMX said something very interesting. What he said was that crack or drugs wasn't the problem. The drug problem, there was no drug problem. The drugs masked the problems. The drugs was what was allowing him to just have a normal day, have a way to deal, have a way to escape his own mind and those demons. And I find it to be like, wow, that was really, really pivotal, very, very profound what he said. That drugs, he didn't have a drug problem. He had a problem with trying to mask his problems with drugs. And that leads me to like thinking about this situation. You got a guy in his 30s hanging out with teenagers, which most of these studios are always like that. The 5 years that I hung out in the studio, the person I hung out with was 15 years older than me. And So it's a normal thing, because people that are creative, they like to keep a young mind, or that young energy. Is like a muse kind of a thing. And on my end, it was never anything uncomfortable, anything sexual. It was no drugs. It was none of that kind of flow. But for a lot of other young men in these situations, it was those things. So, you start to look at DMX and you start to say, why is it so painful? Yes, we understand that the memories are still strong, especially at certain ages in your life when you go through these things. But why is the pain so deep? Why does he feel that? And then I just thought about what else happened between him and this person that you needed to bring that pain. What happened? And he did mention, he said, a lot of things happen in his life that he doesn't even like talk about. And I can understand that. I remember things happening to me in my life where I would just try to shake it off my head and not think about it. I remember when I was like 14 years old, I was hanging out with a professional boxer, because I was into boxing from the age of 14 to 17. And I had this guy that he was a champion of the world at the time, and he was very, 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 very popular. And he took a liking to me, and we would hang out, and there was no drugs whatsoever involved. But he had I was in his car, and while in his car, he reached over and he grabbed my private area, and he unbuttoned my pants, and I was like, whoa. I didn't know what to think. I wasn't necessarily afraid of him, but I knew that he was the champion of the world at the time. So it got very uncomfortable. He saw that I was uncomfortable, and I was able to get out of that situation. And then whenever he came around, I just kind of like was, hey, what's up? Just respected him as the champ, but knew that there was other things that was trying to happen that I wasn't, I really wasn't with. And I was triggered by DMX talking about that pain that he felt, that he was trying to push on with the drugs. And then but before that, he said that the person that he was with didn't love him. And how could you love somebody and do this to them? And I would argue that this person didn't know the effects of crack. When it was that freebase time, when he was 14 years old, arguably 1986, people didn't know. They didn't know, and they didn't see themselves. There was nobody using a stem back then. A stem didn't come into the the stem is in which you smoke the crack. It's a glass. It's like nowadays they even have them for smoking marijuana, and it's a glass pipe. And people would take Brillo and put Brillo on one end of it as the filter. They would put the crack in there and they'll smoke it. And it started out as a bong, and the bong would have this would be the bong, and it'll have two things sticking out, and there'll be water in there. And people used to freebase with that water. They would be, smoking and freebasing and all that kind of stuff. And as time went on, the water went away, and those two things sticking out were able to detach, and that became the way to smoke it. And before you know it, every other store in the hood would have what they call stems, and that's what they would smoke this out of. Back in 1986, they were not smoking in stems. That didn't happen for at least 2-3 more years. And the information, this place with the line up, all these people lined up for You know, these are those tacos. These are supposed to be authentic Mexican style tacos. It's just a very cheap piece of meat that they boil for hours. They call it reduce. We reduce it 3 times. Stop it. When it got too hot, we lowered the flame, and there's a line on the edge of the pot. Stop it. Come on. But, you know, these people love it. I've had it. I'm not impressed. But we have DMX with this older guy in the studio. The information wasn't there that this was a crack, like a ruining your life kind of a thing. We got a kid who's been in and out of jail, who's robbing people, who's rapping real good. And we have a producer who is taking advantage of the youth and their energy and sucking their life force and using them as muses and allowing them to indulge at very, very young ages. Like when I was coming up as a kid, the drugs were always there. I chose not to touch the drugs. I chose not to smoke the weed. And they would even love that. People used to brag about me. They used to be like, oh man, this guy, he don't get high. He's this and that and the other. He's no joke, you know, and he could fight. And you know, it was like that. So now I'm curious as to the demons that he was fighting, and those demons that took so much hold of him that he was willing to smoke crack. He was willing to put his life in a situation where the demons were so deep, the pain, that you needed to numb this pain with crack. And now at 49 years old, the mention of this person's name just takes you right to that place. So I would like DMX to be very, very careful with whatever therapy he's taking. You understand? Because a lot of times therapy will make you feel like a victim, and then they'll put you on medications and that'll swell you up, and you'll be on these medications trying to figure out. I haven't seen this chick in a minute. She's back from wherever she came from. She's been around a long time. And look at her peoples over here. Yeah. Those are her peeps. Sorry, love. Nice nails. Her nails are done. That's funny. She probably makes $250 a day right there. So, what we have is a person in a lot of pain, still in a lot of pain. And not only is he still in a lot of pain, I would argue that he's actually giving this person way too much credit. You know, I think that the pain that he's feeling from this situation that's still so strong in his mind, and he's still triggered by the mention of this person's name. If he's not in therapy, he needs to get into therapy. But if he's been in therapy more than 6 months and he's still triggered by these events that happened when he was a child, he needs to move on from that therapist and do not take any medication from this said therapist, because a therapist will keep you as long as they can keep you coming into their office. That's a fact. And they will pump you and pump you up with all the drugs you can imagine. That's what they'll definitely do. They'll pump you up with so much drugs, you'll be all swollen in the face, stressed the freak out. So if DMX in any way, shape, or form is in therapy and they're not dealing with this issue that's going on, what happened prior to the smoking of the crack, because he smoked crack and he said it. He said, I never did any drugs. And then he said that the crack released the monster in him. Which monster did the crack release? The monster that allowed you to do situations that you were in, the crack allowed you to do it and masked the fact that you did what you did. So I'd rather be on crack and do these things I don't want to do to bring that down than to, because he said he was a kid that, you know, yes, he was involved in crime and robberies, but he never did any drugs. And then he says that the crack released a monster in him. What was that monster? The monster doesn't have to be violent. The monster could just be the monster that does what he's told. And a lot of that happened in these studios with these older men. A lot of things happen when the young man is hanging with the older man, you know? And the question is, why is the young man needing so much love from somewhere else? Why does he, like, yo, that's to me one of the biggest things. Is like, yo, where was your pops at? Where was your father at? Why is that something that we're not discussing? Where's your father? Why are you needing to find love from a man that's old enough to be your father who's not your father? Where's your father? See, that's what it's all about. It's a separating of the home, the man out of the home, losing that hashtag father privilege. When you don't have that father privilege, anything can happen to you. You're almost raising yourself, especially if you were raised by a woman who's trying to figure it out herself. She's trying to figure out the world, and she's raising a boy, and this boy now is looking for love in the studio with his friend who got his back and who loves him, but happens to get him high and get him girls and get him whatever else we don't even know. But it definitely, that pain was so strong about this person that it leads me to believe that it was deeper, that the crack is what allowed you to do whatever it is that you were doing. And then the crack became the crutch that allowed you to cope with what you did while on that. And maybe you didn't even know the distinction. You didn't even know which one was what and at what point, because you're a child raising yourself. So I mean, I'm happy that DMX is sober. I'm happy that he is talking about these kind of things. These things are important. You know, these are the kind of things that we should be talking about. Like, we should be telling our children, like, yo, you know, one day I thought this person was cool. I thought they had a nice car and they was real big and strong. So I didn't think there was anything fruity about them, or I didn't think they didn't have my best interest. They just didn't appear that way. And next thing you know, my pants are down and I don't know what to do. And then what you end up becoming and what you create when these things happen to boys, what you create are very, very, very aggressive human beings that are in denial about the things that they do. And a lot of them go into these drugs and they go deep. And DMX talked about it, and I'm really happy about it. And I keep having to go back to this. This person did not know what he was doing. He didn't know the effects that this was going to have on a child. He was irresponsible. I question whether that person had a father. I question whether or not he would get high with his aunt or something like that, All these aunts running around getting high with their nieces and nephews when they're 14 years old, thinking that's cute. You know who you are. You know what I'm talking about. This is not something that just popped into my head. You know who you aunts are. You know who you guys are that are taking your nieces and nephews and showing them just how cool you really are, because no one else believes it. No one else could imagine that you're cool. So you do stuff like, you buy the beer for the party. And you're going to let them go down in the basement. Everybody chill out, no big deal. And everybody's down in the basement drunk. You remember paying for that. You remember trying to be cool. Well, let me tell you, it has an effect. An effect. Look at this man. He's 49 years old, and he's still stressed out over this. 49 years old. It's a 49-year-old man. Let me show you this. Yo, nice setup over here, buddy. Is this yours? All right.
Hey, I tried.
You try? All right, man. Be safe out here.
Thank you.
Not today. You be safe out here. Sorry. I'm all in the crosswalk, so I apologize to the woman. So that's my take. You are appreciated for watching. Don't forget there's a Venmo and a Cash App. And the Cash App, what a lot of people had to do with the Cash App, they had to actually type it in a few times because it'll say no results. But if you type it in, the algorithm gets a little persistent and boom, it'll find me. And I'm there with the red carnation. Looks like a rose, but it was a carnation. And it's capital E, capital R with ElvisRosenberg. Capital E and capital R, but one word. $, ElvisRosenberg. And also there's the Venmo. And the Venmo is at Elvis/Rosenberg. And you are appreciated. Thank you very much for watching. Clout chasing episode, I believe, is 5.